Guard Daniel Hayes had been standing at his post outside Windsor Castle for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes when he heard the sound that would change his life forever. It started as a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across the countryside, but quickly grew into something much more terrifying. The unmistakable roar of a truck's engine combined with the screech of brakes that weren't working. The afternoon had been perfectly ordinary until that moment. Tourists were taking their usual photographs. Children were pointing excitedly at his red uniform and tall black hat. And Daniel had been mentally counting down the minutes until his shift change. He had served as a royal guard for 3 years, and the routine had become as familiar as breathing. Stand perfectly still. Maintain perfect posture. Ignore all distractions. Maintain the dignity of the crown with unwavering discipline. But the sound of that truck changed everything in an instant. Daniel's training had taught him to remain motionless regardless of what happened around him. But his peripheral vision caught movement that made his blood run cold. A massive delivery truck was careening down the hill toward the castle, its driver clearly struggling to maintain control. The vehicle was moving far too fast for the narrow road, and from where Daniel stood, could see that the truck was heading directly toward a group of schoolchildren who were gathered near the castle's visitor entrance. The children were part of what appeared to be a school field trip, about 20 kids who looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, all wearing matching blue sweaters and yellow safety vests. They were clustered together listening to their teacher explain something about the castle's history, completely unaware of the danger bearing down on them. Daniel's mind processed the situation in milliseconds. The truck was approximately 2 yards away and closing fast. At its current speed, it would reach the children in less than 30 seconds. The group was positioned in such a way that they couldn't see the approaching vehicle, and their teacher had her back turned toward the road as she pointed out. Architectural features of the castle, every instinct Daniel possessed screamed at him to act, but his training held him frozen in place. Royal guards were not supposed to move. They were not supposed to speak. They were not supposed to break character under any circumstances. He had been drilled on this point countless times during his training. The guards represented centuries of tradition and discipline, and maintaining that image was considered more important than almost anything else. But as Daniel watched the truck continue its deadly approach toward those innocent children, he realized that some things were more important than tradition. The driver of the truck was frantically pumping his brakes and yanking on his steering wheel, but the vehicle's momentum was carrying it inexorably toward the group of schoolchildren. Daniel could see the man's face through the windshield, a look of absolute terror as he realized he was about to hit a group of children and was powerless to stop it. Time seemed to slow down as Daniel made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Without hesitation, he abandoned his post and began running toward the children with every ounce of speed he possessed. The 200-yard sprint felt like both an eternity and an instant. Daniel's heavy ceremonial boots weren't designed for running, and his ornate red uniform created wind resistance that slowed him down. But adrenaline gave him speed he didn't know he possessed. Behind him, he could hear gasps and shouts from the tourists who had been photographing him just moments before. But he didn't look back. As he ran, Daniel's mind automatically calculated angles and timing. He could see that he might be able to reach the children before the truck did, but it would be extremely close. The group was spread out over about 20 feet, and there was no way he could move all of them to safety in time. He would have to make a choice about whom to save first. His eyes locked onto a little girl at the edge of the group, who was wearing thick glasses and seemed to be having trouble keeping up with her classmates. She was standing slightly apart from the others, looking confused and vulnerable. Something about her reminded Daniel of his own younger sister, and he knew instantly that she would be his first priority. The truck was now less than 50 yards away, and Daniel could hear its engine roaring like an angry beast. The driver had given up on the brakes and was leaning on his horn, creating a deafening noise that finally caught the attention of the teacher and some of the children. Daniel saw the exact moment when the teacher turned around and spotted the approaching truck. Her face went white with terror, and she opened her mouth to scream a warning to the children. But Daniel knew there wasn't time for them to react and get to safety on their own. With 30 yards left to cover, Daniel pushed himself harder than he had ever pushed before. His lungs were burning. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst, and his legs felt like they were moving through quicksand. But he kept running, knowing that every fraction of a second mattered. 20 yards. The little girl with glasses had now noticed the commotion and was looking around in confusion, not yet understanding the danger she was in. Some of the other children had started to turn toward the sound of the approaching truck, but they were moving too slowly to escape on their own. 10 yards. Daniel could now see individual expressions on the children's faces, confusion giving way to fear as they began to comprehend what was happening. The teacher was shouting instructions, trying to get the children to move, but panic was setting in, and some of them were freezing in place rather than running. 5 yards. The truck was so close now that Daniel could feel the vibrations from its engine in the ground beneath his feet. He reached the little girl with glasses just as she opened her mouth to scream, scooped her up in his arms, and dove toward the rest of the group. What happened next would be captured by dozens of cell phone cameras and security footage, creating images that would be broadcast around the world within hours. But in that moment, Daniel Hayes wasn't thinking about cameras or consequences or the career. He was probably ending by abandoning his post. He was thinking only about the children. He was trying to save and praying that he would be fast enough to make a difference. Daniel's collision with the group of children sent bodies tumbling in all directions. But it was controlled chaos, the kind of organized panic that saves lives rather than ending them. With the little girl still clutched in his left arm, he used his right arm and his body weight to sweep 3 more children away from the truck's path, shouting at the top of his lungs for the others to run. The truck thundered past them with only inches to spare, its massive wheels leaving deep gouges in the ground exactly where 4 children had been standing just seconds before. The wind from its passage was so strong that it knocked Daniel's ceremonial hat clean off his head, sending it tumbling across the courtyard like a tumbleweed. For a moment that felt like an hour, everyone was frozen in shock. The truck continued down the hill, gradually slowing as the driver finally managed to get some traction with his brakes. But the immediate danger had passed. Daniel found himself lying on the ground with 4 children sprawled around him, all of them breathing hard, but miraculously unhurt. The little girl with glasses was the first to speak, her voice shaky but clear. "You saved us," she said, looking up at Daniel with wide eyes filled with awe and gratitude. "You ran so fast. I've never seen anyone run that fast." Daniel struggled to his feet, his legs still trembling from the sprint and the adrenaline crash that was beginning to hit him. His pristine red uniform was now torn and dirty. His perfectly polished boots were scuffed and muddy, and he was breathing so hard he could barely speak. "Are you all right?" he managed to ask, looking around at the children and doing a quick head count. All 20 members of the school group appeared to be present and accounted for, though several were crying and most looked badly shaken. The teacher, a young woman named Ms. Rodriguez, was moving through the group checking each child for injuries while trying to hold back her own tears. "I can't believe what just happened," she kept repeating. "I can't believe how close we came to... ... She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what she meant. Daniel noticed that a crowd of tourists and castle staff had begun gathering around them. Cell phones were everywhere, with people taking photos and recording videos of the aftermath. He could hear fragments of excited conversations in multiple languages as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that? The guard just abandoned his post and ran. Saved those children's lives. I caught the whole thing on video. Is he allowed to do that? I thought the guards never moved." Through the crowd, Daniel could see his fellow guards maintaining their positions at other posts around the castle, but he noticed that several of them were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some looked concerned, others seemed impressed, and a few appeared worried about what consequences his actions might bring. Daniel's immediate supervisor, Sergeant Phillips, appeared through the crowd with a speed that suggested he had been running. As well, his face was grim, and Daniel knew that the conversation they were about to have would not be pleasant. "Guard Hayes," Sergeant Phillips said in a tone that was carefully neutral, "I need you to come with me immediately. There are procedures that must be followed after an incident like this." Before Daniel could respond, The little girl with glasses stepped between him and the sergeant. Despite being less than half their size, she planted herself firmly in front of Daniel and looked up at Sergeant Phillips with a determination that was remarkable for someone so young. "He's a hero," she announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "He saved my life and my friends' lives. You can't be mad at him for being a hero." Several of the other children nodded agreement, and their teacher put a protective hand on the little girl's shoulder. "She's right," Ms. Rodriguez said. To Sergeant Phillips, "This man risked his own safety and his career to save my students. Whatever protocols he broke, he did it for the right reasons." Daniel could see that Sergeant Phillips was struggling with the situation. On one hand, discipline and adherence to protocol were fundamental to the Royal Guard's effectiveness and reputation. On the other hand, Daniel had just prevented what could have been a horrific tragedy. And there were now dozens of witnesses who had seen him act with incredible courage and selflessness. "I understand the circumstances," Sergeant Phillips said carefully, "but there are still procedures that must be followed. Guard Hayes needs to report for debriefing immediately." As they began to walk toward the castle's administrative offices, Daniel heard someone in the crowd calling his name. He turned to see an elderly man pushing through the group of tourists, his face flushed with excitement and emotion. "Young man," the elderly gentleman called out. "Wait just a moment, please." The man reached them and extended his hand to Daniel with a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "My name is Professor William Hartley, and I teach history at Oxford University. I've been studying the Royal Guard for over 40 years, and I want you to know that what you did today represents everything that is finest about your service." Professor Hartley looked around at the crowd that had gathered to listen to his words. The Royal Guard was created not just to stand silently and look impressive for tourists. They were created to protect people, to serve as a living symbol of the Crown's commitment to the safety and welfare of all British citizens. He gestured toward the children, who were still staying close to Daniel, despite their teacher's efforts to organize them for departure. What this young man did today was not a violation of his duty. It was the highest expression of what his duty truly means. Sergeant Phillips looked uncomfortable with the impromptu speech, but he couldn't very well tell a respected Oxford professor to stop talking in front of such a large crowd. Throughout history, Professor Hartley continued, the guards who are most remembered and most honored are those who showed initiative and courage when lives were at stake. This young man has just joined the ranks of the most distinguished guards in the regiment's history. The crowd began to applaud, and Daniel felt his face burning with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. He had never sought attention or recognition. He had simply reacted instinctively to a dangerous situation. But he was beginning to understand that his split-second decision to abandon his post and run toward those children had set in motion consequences that extended far beyond saving for young lives. As they resumed walking toward the administrative offices, the little girl with glasses broke free from her teacher and ran up to Daniel one more time. "What's your name?" she asked breathlessly. "Daniel," he replied. "Daniel Hayes." "I'm Emily," she said with a shy smile. "Emily Watson, and when I grow up, I want to be brave just like you." Daniel knelt down to her level and looked into her eyes, seeing in them the same innocence and trust that had motivated him to risk everything to protect her. "Emily," he said quietly, "you're already braver than you know. You didn't panic, you didn't freeze up, and you trusted me to help you, even though you had never seen me before. That takes real courage." As Emily rejoined her classmates and Daniel continued toward what he assumed would be the end of his career with the Royal Guard, he had no idea that his story was just beginning. The cell phone videos of his heroic sprint were already being uploaded to social media, where they would be seen by millions of people around the world within the next few hours. But more importantly, his actions had caught the attention of someone who had the power to change not just Daniel's future, but the future of the Royal Guard itself. The debriefing room at Windsor Castle felt more like a courtroom than an office. Daniel sat at a small wooden table facing 3 senior officers, each of whom looked as if they were preparing to deliver a verdict that had already been decided. The formal atmosphere was made even more intimidating by the portraits of previous monarchs that lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch every movement in the room. Colonel Patricia Thornberry, the commanding officer of Daniel's regiment, sat in the center chair with a thick folder open in front of her. To her left was Major James Whitmore, whose reputation for strict discipline was legendary among the guards. To her right sat Captain Sarah Morrison, the youngest of the three. But known for her by-the-book approach to military protocol, Guard Hayes, Colonel Thornberry began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of military authority. You are here to account for your actions during today's incident at approximately 14:30 hours. Before we begin, I want to make it clear that this is a formal inquiry, and your responses will be recorded and made part of your permanent service record. Daniel straightened in his chair and nodded. Yes, ma'am, I understand. In your own words, please describe the sequence of events that led to your decision to abandon your assigned post. Daniel took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the afternoon. He described the moment he first heard the truck's engine, his assessment of the danger to the children, and his decision to act, despite knowing it would mean breaking protocol. As he spoke, he watched the officers' faces for any sign of their reaction, but their expressions remained professionally neutral. When he finished his account, Major Whitmore leaned forward and consulted his notes. Guard Hayes, during your training, you were specifically instructed that Royal Guards do not leave their posts under any circumstances. You were told that maintaining position is fundamental to the dignity and effectiveness of the Guard. Is that correct? Yes, sir, that is correct. And yet you chose to disregard that training and abandon your post to involve yourself in a civilian emergency situation? Daniel felt a flash of irritation at the way the major was characterizing his actions, but he kept his voice steady. I chose to prevent 4 children from being killed by a runaway truck. I understood that I was breaking protocol, but I believed that saving human lives was more important than maintaining my ceremonial position. Captain Morrison spoke up for the first time. Guard Hayes, are you aware that there are emergency response protocols in place for situations like this? The castle has security personnel and emergency services that are specifically trained to handle civilian crises. Yes, ma'am, but there wasn't time to alert emergency services. The truck was less than 30 seconds away from hitting those children. By the time I could have radioed for help, it would have been too late.
Ow.
Colonel Thornberry made a note in her folder and then looked up at Daniel with an expression that was impossible to read. Guard Hayes, I want you to understand the seriousness of what you've done. Your actions today have attracted significant media attention. There are videos of you running across the courtyard being shared on social media platforms around the world. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He hadn't considered the broader implications of his actions beyond the immediate need to save the children. The thought that his moment of decision was being watched and judged by millions of strangers was overwhelming. Furthermore, the colonel continued, we have received inquiries from several news organizations requesting interviews with you. The Palace press office has been fielded calls from journalists in 12 different countries. Major Whitmore pulled out his tablet and showed Daniel a series of screenshots from various social media posts. Royal Guard breaks character to save children, read one headline. Hero Guard abandons post in life-saving sprint, read another. The videos had been viewed millions of times, and the comment sections were filled with praise for Daniel's actions. This level of attention, Captain Morrison explained, creates complications for the regiment. The Royal Guard's effectiveness depends in part on maintaining a certain mystique and dignity. When guards become individual personalities rather than anonymous symbols of service, it can undermine the institution as a whole. Daniel felt a sinking sensation as he began to understand where this conversation was heading. Despite having saved for children's lives, he was being treated as if he had caused a problem that needed to be managed. However, Colonel Thornberry said, and Daniel caught a subtle change in her tone. We have also received some rather unusual communications that put your actions in a different light. She opened another folder and pulled out what appeared to be an official letter bearing an impressive seal. This arrived by a special courier approximately 1 hour ago. It's from Buckingham Palace. Daniel's eyes widened as he recognized the royal crest at the top of the letter. Colonel Thornberry began to read. Her Majesty has been made aware of the actions of Guard Daniel Hayes during the incident at Windsor Castle today. Her Majesty wishes to express her personal appreciation for Guard Hayes's courage and quick thinking in preventing what could have been a tragic loss of life. The room fell silent as the implications of the Queen's personal involvement sank in. Head spinning as he tried to process this unexpected development. The letter continues, Colonel Thornberry said, Her Majesty believes that guard Hayes's actions represent the finest traditions of service and sacrifice that define the Royal Guard. She has requested that Guard Hayes be commended rather than disciplined for his decisive action in protecting innocent civilians. Major Whitmore looked as surprised as Daniel felt. The Queen herself has weighed in on this matter. There's more, Colonel Thornberry said. We've also received communications from the Prime Minister's office, the Mayor of London, and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. All of them are praising Guard Hayes's actions and suggesting that he should be recognized as a hero rather than disciplined as a protocol violator. Daniel felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He had expected to be dismissed from service, possibly with a formal reprimand that would follow him for the rest of his military career. Instead, he was being told that the highest authorities in the land were calling him a hero. Captain Morrison consulted her own notes. We've also been contacted by the school whose children were involved in the incident. The headmaster, the parents, and the local education authority have all submitted formal letters of gratitude. They're requesting that Guard Hayes be recognized for his service. Most significantly, Colonel Thornberry continued, We received a call from the truck driver who was involved in the incident. His brakes had failed completely, and he estimates that he would have struck at least 3 or 4 children if Guard Hayes hadn't intervened when he did. The colonel closed the folder and looked directly at Daniel. Guard Hayes, your actions today were technically a violation of protocol, but they were also an extraordinary example of courage, quick thinking, and selfless service. The question we face now is how to balance the need for discipline and order with recognition of truly heroic conduct. Daniel found his voice. Ma'am, I want to be clear that I don't regret my actions. If I were faced with the same situation tomorrow, I would make the same choice. I understand that there may be consequences, and I'm prepared to accept them. Thornberry smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Guard Hayes, I don't think you understand what kind of consequences you're about to face, but I can assure you that they are not the kind you've been expecting. She stood up, and Daniel automatically rose to attention. This inquiry is concluded. Guard Hayes, you are to report to my office at 0800 hours tomorrow morning for further instructions regarding your new assignment. As Daniel left the debriefing room, his mind was reeling with questions about what his new assignment might involve. He had expected to be packing his belongings and looking for civilian employment by the end of the week. Instead, he was apparently being recommended for some kind of recognition, but as he walked through the castle corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that the most significant consequences of his actions were still to come, and that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Daniel arrived at Colonel Thornberry's office at exactly 0800 hours, his uniform pressed to perfection despite the sleepless night he had spent wondering what his new assignment would entail. The colonel's secretary, an efficient-looking woman in her 50s, gestured for him to wait while she announced his arrival through the intercom. Send him in immediately, came the colonel's voice, carrying a note of excitement that seemed unusual for such an early morning meeting. Daniel entered the office to find Colonel Thornberry standing beside her desk with a man he didn't recognize. A tall, distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit who carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Guard Hayes, Colonel Thornberry said with a smile that seemed unusually warm. I'd like you to meet Sir Anthony Pemberton, Private Secretary to Her Majesty. He's traveled here specifically to discuss your situation. Daniel snapped to attention and offered a crisp salute, which Sir Anthony acknowledged with a gracious nod. Guard Hayes, Sir Anthony began, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated at the finest British institutions. Her Majesty was quite impressed by the reports she received about your actions yesterday, as she has asked me to discuss with you a rather unique opportunity. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. A direct communication from the Queen herself was beyond anything he had ever imagined might result from his split-second decision to save those children. Please sit down, Sir Anthony continued, gesturing to a comfortable chair. What I'm about to propose will require your careful consideration. Colonel Thornberry poured tea for all 3 of them before settling behind her desk. Sir Anthony, Why don't you explain the background behind this proposal? Certainly, Sir Anthony sipped his tea thoughtfully before continuing. Her Majesty has been concerned for some time about the public perception of the UHR Guard. While the Guards are deeply respected as symbols of British tradition, there has been growing discussion about whether they serve any practical purpose. In the modern world, Daniel listened intently, unsure where this conversation was leading. Yesterday's incident, Sir Anthony continued, has provided an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate that the Royal Guard can be both traditional and relevant, both ceremonial and practical. Your actions have captured the public imagination in a way that shows the Guard as protectors of the people, not merely decorative figures. Colonel Thornberry leaned forward. Daniel, what Sir Anthony's leading up to is this. Her Majesty would like you to become the first member of a new Royal Guard unit that would combine traditional ceremonial duties with active public safety responsibilities. Daniel felt his mind racing to process this information. I'm not sure I understand, ma'am. What would that look like in practice? Anthony smiled and pulled out a leather portfolio. Okay, the concept is still being developed, but the basic idea is this. Selected Royal Guards would receive additional training in emergency response, crowd control, and public safety. They would continue to perform their ceremonial duties, but they would also be authorized to take action when public safety is at risk. Think of it as evolution rather than revolution, Colonel Thornberry added. The pageantry and tradition would remain unchanged, but the Guards would have broader authority to protect the public when circumstances require it. Daniel was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was being proposed. You're talking about changing centuries of protocol based on one incident? We're talking about adapting centuries of tradition to meet modern needs, Sir Anthony corrected. Gently, the Royal Guard has always served to protect the Crown and the people. What we're proposing is simply expanding the definition of how that protection can be provided. Sir Anthony opened his portfolio and showed Daniel several documents. This program would be voluntary and would require extensive additional training. Guards who participate would receive specialized instruction in emergency medical response, crisis management, and public safety procedures. They would maintain their ceremonial role, but would also serve as a highly visible symbol of security and protection, Colonel Thornberry added. The program would initially include only a small number of guards stationed at high-traffic locations like Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, and the Tower of London. The idea is to have trained responders positioned where large crowds of civilians are most likely to encounter emergencies. Daniel looked at the documents, seeing detailed training schedules, certification requirements, and performance standards. That would be expected of participants in this new program. It was clearly a serious professional development opportunity, not just a symbolic gesture. Why me? Daniel asked. I appreciate the confidence. But surely there are guards with more experience or better qualifications for something like this. Sir Anthony exchanged a meaningful look with Colonel Thornberry before responding. Guard Hayes, what you demonstrated yesterday wasn't just physical courage or quick reflexes. You showed judgment under pressure, the ability to assess a complex situation instantly, the moral courage to do what was right even when it meant violating your training. Those qualities can't be taught, Colonel Thornberry added. They're either part of someone's character or they're not. You've proven that you have them. Daniel felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being offered. What would happen to my current duties, my current unit? You would be promoted to corporal and would lead the new unit, Sir Anthony explained. You would continue to serve as a Royal Guard, but you would also become the first Royal Guard emergency response specialist. It's a new position that would be created specifically for this program. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Colonel Thornberry's secretary entered with a message that she handed directly to Sir Anthony. After reading the message, Sir Anthony looked up with an expression of pleased surprise. This is quite remarkable timing. I've just received word that the BBC would like to interview you about yesterday's incident. They're particularly interested in discussing how your actions might represent a new direction for the Royal Guard. Daniel felt a wave of anxiety at the thought of being interviewed on television. Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak about policy changes or the future of the Guard. I just reacted to an emergency situation. That's exactly why you're the right person to speak about this, Colonel Thornberry said. You're not a politician or a public relations specialist. You're a serving guard who acted on instinct to protect innocent people. That authenticity is precisely what the public needs to hear. Sir Anthony consulted his watch. The interview would be this afternoon, if you're willing to participate. It would be an excellent opportunity to explain the new program and to help the public understand how the Royal Guard can continue to evolve while maintaining its essential character. Daniel realized that he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just his own future, but potentially the future of an institution that had existed for centuries. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine whether he remained an anonymous ceremonial guard, or became the public face of a fundamental change in how the Royal Guard served the British people. Before you answer, Sir Anthony said, there's one more thing you should know. Her Majesty has expressed her personal interest in this program's success. She believes that the Royal Guard should be living symbols of service and protection, not museum pieces. Your actions yesterday have provided the inspiration for what could be the most significant modernization of the Guard in its entire history. Daniel took a deep breath, thinking about the little girl with glasses who had looked up at him with such trust and gratitude, about the other children whose lives had hung in the balance during those crucial seconds when he decided to run toward danger. Instead of maintaining his ceremonial position, the choice, when he really considered it, wasn't difficult at all. The BBC television studio felt surreal to Daniel as he sat across from veteran journalist Margaret Ashworth, whose warm smile helped calm his nerves before they went live. Behind the cameras, he could see Sir Anthony and Colonel Thornberry watching. From the producer's booth, both of them offering encouraging nods. We're live in 30 seconds, the floor director announced. And Daniel felt his heart rate increase, despite all the preparation they had done for this interview. Just remember, Margaret said quietly, speak from the heart. The public already loves what you did now. They want to understand who you are and why you did it. The red light on the camera flashed on, and Margaret turned to face the lens with practiced ease. Good afternoon, I'm Margaret Ashworth. With me today is Corporal Daniel Hayes of the Royal Guard, whose heroic actions yesterday have captured the attention of people around the world. Corporal Hayes, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, Daniel replied, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. Let's start with yesterday's events. Can you walk us through what was going through your mind when you saw that truck heading toward the children? Daniel had practiced his answer to this question, but when he spoke, the words came directly from his heart rather than from any prepared script. Honestly, I wasn't thinking at all in the traditional sense. I saw children in danger, and every instinct I had told me to protect them. The protocol, the training, the consequences, none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that. For innocent kids were about to be hurt, and I was in a position to prevent it. You knew you were breaking rules that have existed for centuries. Weren't you concerned about the consequences to your career? Daniel paused, remembering the fear he had felt as he ran across the courtyard, not for his own safety, but for what his actions might mean for his future. I was terrified, actually. I was more terrified of what would happen if I didn't act. I knew I might lose my job. But I also knew I could never live with myself if I let those children get hurt when I had the power to save them. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her journalist's instincts detecting something important in his response. You mentioned being terrified, but the video footage shows you moving with remarkable speed and purpose. You don't look like someone who is afraid. Fear and action aren't mutually exclusive, Daniel replied, thinking about conversations he'd had with combat veterans during his training. Some of the bravest people I've known have told me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear when action is necessary. That's a mature perspective for someone your age. How old are you, Corporal Hayes? I'm 26, ma'am. Margaret consulted her notes. You've been with the Royal Guard for 3 years. What drew you to this service originally? Daniel smiled, remembering his childhood fascination with the guards he'd seen during school trips to London. I grew up in a small town in Yorkshire, and my first trip to London when I was 8 years old included a visit to Buckingham Palace. I remember being absolutely amazed by the guards, their discipline, their bearing, the sense that they represented. Something important and enduring. And now you're helping to change what that service means for the future. I hope so. think the Royal Guard has always been about protecting what's important, the crown, the people, the values that make Britain special. What we're doing now is just expanding our understanding of how that protection can be provided. Margaret had been briefed on the new program. Daniel could see her preparing to ask the questions that would introduce the public to this significant policy change. Can you tell us about the new Royal Guard Emergency Response Program? Took a breath, knowing that his next words would be heard by millions of people and would help shape public opinion about a fundamental change to a beloved institution. The program recognizes that Royal Guards are often positioned in locations where large numbers of civilians gather. Tourists, families, children. We're already there. We're already trained to observe and react. We're already trusted by the public as symbols of safety and protection. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What the program does is provide additional training so that guards can respond appropriately to emergency situations while maintaining their ceremonial duties. We're not replacing emergency services or becoming police officers. We're simply acknowledging that there are times when immediate action can save lives, and guards are uniquely positioned to provide that immediate response. What kind of additional training are we talking about? Emergency medical response, crowd control, crisis communication, and situational assessment. We'll learn how to recognize and respond to various types of emergencies while maintaining the dignity and discipline that the public expects from the Royal Guard. Margaret nodded approvingly. This is quite a departure from tradition. Have there been concerns about changing something so fundamental to British heritage? There have been discussions, Daniel admitted. Change is always challenging, especially when it involves institutions that people care deeply about. But I think it's important to remember that the Royal Guard has always evolved. The uniforms, the procedures, the locations we serve, all of these have changed over the centuries too. Meet the needs of different times. What hasn't changed is our core mission: to serve and protect. Yesterday, serving and protecting meant running toward danger to save children's lives. Tomorrow, it might mean something entirely different, but the fundamental commitment remains the same. Margaret smiled at his response. You've become something of a celebrity since yesterday.
Ow!
How are you handling the attention? Daniel felt his cheeks redden slightly. It's overwhelming, to be honest. I never expected anything like this. Moment. The real heroes in this story are the children who stayed calm under pressure, and the teacher who kept her students safe after the immediate danger passed. Speaking of the children, I understand you've stayed in contact with them? Yes, ma'am. Emily Watson. She's the little girl with glasses who is closest to the truck's path. She wrote me a letter. Her teacher helped her send it to the castle. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. She drew a picture of a guard running. She wrote, "Thank you for being faster than the scary truck." Margaret's expression softened visibly. That must mean a great deal to you. It means everything, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. When I think about why this program is important, I think about Emily and the other children who might find themselves in dangerous situations where a guard's immediate response could make the difference between life and death. What would you say to people who argue that this program compromises the traditional dignity of the Royal Guard? Daniel had anticipated this question and had given it considerable thought. I would say that there's nothing more dignified than risking your own safety to protect innocent people. The Royal Guard has always stood for the highest ideals of service and sacrifice. This program simply provides more opportunities to live up to those ideals. The video of your rescue has been viewed over 50 million times on various social media platforms. What impact do you think that level of attention will have on public perception of the Royal Guard? I hope it reminds people that the guards are human beings, not just symbols. We care about the same things everyone else cares about: keeping families safe, protecting children, making sure that good triumphs over evil. The uniform and the ceremony are important, but they're ways of expressing deeper values, not ends in themselves. Margaret consulted her notes one final time. What's next for you, Corporal Hayes? I'll begin the specialized training for the emergency response program next month. I'll also be working with other guards who volunteer for the program, sharing what I learned from yesterday's experience in helping to develop protocols that balance emergency response with ceremonial duties. And personally, how has this experience changed your life? Daniel paused, thinking about the events of the past 24 hours and how dramatically they had altered his understanding of his own role and capabilities. It's taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is act on your instincts when people need help. It's also taught me that tradition and innovation don't have to be enemies. The best traditions are living things that grow and adapt while maintaining their essential character. Any final thoughts for our viewers? Just that I'm grateful to serve in a role where protecting people is part of the job description. I'm excited about helping to expand what that protection looks like. The Royal Guard will always stand for the best of British values: courage, service, and commitment to the common good. As the interview concluded and the cameras stopped rolling, Daniel felt a profound sense of completion. He had successfully articulated not just what he had done, but why it mattered and what it meant for the future. Margaret approached him after the crew began packing up their equipment. "That was beautifully done, Corporal. You've given the public a window into both your character and the character of the institution you serve. I think this program is going to be very well received." Sir Anthony and Colonel Thornberry joined them, both looking pleased with how the interview had gone. "Outstanding job, Daniel," Colonel Thornberry said. "You've represented the Royal Guard with distinction." Sir Anthony nodded agreement. "Her Majesty will be very pleased with how you've presented this program. I think you've helped ensure its success." As they prepared to leave the studio, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily Watson's teacher. "Emily watched your interview with her parents. She says she wants to be a Royal Guard when she grows up, so she can help keep other kids safe. You've inspired more than just policy changes, Corporal Hayes." Daniel smiled as he read the message, realizing that the most important consequences of his actions weren't the programs or policies or media attention. The most important consequence was that a little girl now believed that adults would risk everything to keep children safe, and that service to others was something worth aspiring to. That belief, Daniel thought, was worth more than all the recognition in the world. 6 months after the incident that changed his life, Daniel stood in the same spot at Windsor Castle, where he had first heard the runaway truck's engine. But everything else had changed dramatically. He now wore the uniform of a corporal in the newly established Royal Guard Emergency Response Unit, with additional insignia that identified him as a certified first responder and crisis intervention specialist. The training had been intensive: 8 weeks of advanced medical response, crowd psychology, emergency communications, and tactical assessment. Daniel had learned to treat traumatic injuries, coordinate with emergency services, and manage chaotic situations while maintaining the composure expected of a Royal Guard. Most importantly, he had learned to trust his instincts while following new protocols that balanced immediate response with proper procedures. Today was special for several reasons. It marked the official launch of the Emergency Response Program, with Daniel and 5 other guards becoming the first certified members of the unit. More significantly, it was the day Emily Watson and her classmates were returning to Windsor Castle for a follow-up visit that had been arranged through their school. Daniel watched as the familiar blue minibus pulled into the castle car park, carrying the same group of children whose lives he had saved half a year earlier. But these were not the same frightened kids who had scattered in panic as a truck bore down on them. These children stepped off the bus with confidence and excitement, their faces bright with anticipation. Emily spotted him immediately and ran across the courtyard, her thick glasses bouncing as she moved. She had grown several inches in the past 6 months and had developed the assured bearing of someone who had experienced real danger and survived it. "Corporal Hayes," she called out, using his new rank with obvious pride. "We saw you on the television again last week." Daniel knelt down to her level, just as he had on that terrifying afternoon months earlier. "Hello, Emily. How are you doing?" "I'm brilliant," she replied with a grin that seemed to light up the entire courtyard. "I've been reading about the Royal Guards in the library, and I know all about the new program now. My mom says you're famous." Ms. Rodriguez, the teacher who had shepherded her students through their traumatic experience, approached with a warm smile. She looked more relaxed and confident than Daniel remembered, though he could see that she still kept a protective watch over her students. "Corporal Hayes," she said, extending her hand, "the children have been looking forward to this visit for weeks. They've prepared something special for you. The group of 20 children gathered in a semicircle around Daniel, and Emily stepped forward carrying a large, colorful book that appeared to be handmade. "We made this for you," she announced. Proudly, "It's the story of what happened that day, but we wrote it like a proper adventure story." Daniel accepted the book with hands that trembled slightly. The cover showed a drawing of a royal guard running toward a group of children, with the title, "The Day Our Guard Became a Hero," written in colorful letters across the top. As he flipped through the pages, Daniel saw that each child had contributed artwork, stories, and reflections about their experience. The book was filled with drawings of guards in red uniforms helping people, pictures of happy families, and stories about courage and kindness. One page, illustrated with a detailed drawing of Daniel's sprint across the courtyard, contained text. That made him pause. Sometimes being brave means breaking rules to help people. Our guard showed us that protecting others is more important than following orders when people are in danger. Another page showed a picture of children and adults working together with the caption, "We learned that heroes come in all sizes, and that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave." "There's more," Emily said, practically bouncing with excitement. Turn to the back page. Daniel flipped to the final page of the book and found a letter signed by all 20 children. Their teacher, their parents, and the school's headmaster. "Dear Corporal Hayes, 6 months ago, you saved our lives by running faster than we thought was possible and caring more than we knew a stranger could care. But you did something even more important than saving us from that truck. You showed us that there are adults in the world who will risk everything to protect children, even children they don't know. Because of what you did, we feel safer in the world. We trust that good people will help us when we need help. Believe that being brave and kind is more important than being perfect. Thank you for teaching us these lessons. We'll never forget. You and we promise to help other people the same way you helped us." Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes as he read the letter. Around him, he could see other visitors to the castle stopping to watch the reunion, many of them taking photos and videos. But the crowd didn't matter. What mattered were these 20 children who had trusted him with their lives and were now trusting him with their hopes for the future. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you." "That's not all," she replied with a mischievous grin. "We have a surprise for you, too." Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward carrying what appeared to be an official document in a frame. "The children petitioned their local council to have you recognized as an honorary citizen of their borough. The mayor signed the proclamation last week." Daniel read the ornate certificate that declared him an exemplary citizen whose courage and selflessness embody the finest values of public service. It was signed not just by the mayor, but by representatives from the police, fire service, and emergency medical services. "The really exciting part," Emily continued, "is that they're going to name the playground at our school after you. It's going to be called the Corporal Hayes Courage Playground. And there's going to be a statue of a royal guard helping children." Daniel felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of recognition he was receiving. What had started as a split-second decision to save children's lives had grown into something that would be remembered. Long after he retired from service, Colonel Thornberry approached the group, her face beaming with pride. "Corporal Hayes, I have some news that I think you'll find interesting." She handed him an official-looking document bearing the royal seal. "Her Majesty has approved the expansion of the emergency response program to all Royal Guard units. Based on the success of your pilot program, we'll be training 50 additional guards over the next year." Daniel looked up from the document in amazement. 50 guards? "The program has exceeded all expectations," Colonel Thornberry explained. "Public approval ratings for the Royal Guard are at an all-time high. Recruitment applications have increased by 300%, and we've received requests from other Commonwealth nations to help them establish similar programs." Emily tugged at Daniel's uniform sleeve to get his attention. "Does this mean there will be more guards like you who can help kids?" "That's exactly what it means, Emily. There will be guards at castles and palaces all over the country who are trained to help people in emergencies." Emily's face lit up with satisfaction. "Good. Then other kids will be safe too." As the visit continued, Daniel found himself reflecting on the remarkable chain of events that had begun with his decision to run toward danger instead of maintaining his ceremonial position. That choice had not only saved 4 lives, but had triggered changes that would affect thousands of people for years to come. The emergency response program had become a model for how traditional institutions could adapt to modern needs without losing their essential character. Daniel had received awards, recognition, and opportunities that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. But the most meaningful recognition came from Emily and her classmates, who saw him not as a celebrity or a symbol, but as someone who had proven that adults would risk everything to keep children safe. As the afternoon drew to a close and the children prepared to return to their school, Emily approached Daniel one final time. "Corporal Hayes," she said with the seriousness that he had come to associate with her remarkable maturity, "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up." "What's that, Emily?" "I want to be someone who helps people when they're scared, just like you did. Maybe I'll be a guard, or maybe I'll be a doctor, or maybe I'll be a teacher. But whatever I do, I want to be brave enough to help people even when it's hard." Daniel knelt down and looked into her eyes, seeing in them the same trust and determination that had motivated him to abandon his post and sprint across a courtyard to save her life. "Emily," he said quietly, "you're already helping people by being brave and kind and smart. And whatever you decide to become, I know you'll be extraordinary at it." As he watched the bus disappear down the castle drive, carrying Emily and her classmates back to their normal lives, Daniel understood that his own life would never be normal again. But he wouldn't change a single thing about the path that had brought him to this moment. He had learned that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or perfect courage. It was about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when those choices mattered most. And sometimes those choices echoed far beyond the moment they were made, inspiring changes that made the world a little bit safer and a lot more hopeful.